40 years ago, I came to the Sahara to study a mysterious people, the Tuareg. Now I'm back in Algeria to see what's changed. The landscape here has hardly altered in thousands of years. In the middle of the 14th century, a Spanish map covered the blank spaces of the Sahara with the words, "This region is occupied by people who veil their mouths. You can only see their eyes. They live in tents and have caravans of camels." But now I was about to revisit my past, and I must say it came as something of a shock. I've heard about this. I've seen it once before. It's a German book. Can't read the text at all. I think it's this. This is your past catching up on you. the original 1960s hippie in the Sahara. But yes, that's me. Isn't it horrific? Smoking, unwashed, looking a little bit intelligent, perhaps. Can't say more than that for it, though. Terrible, terrible. I had thought that things would have changed with the arrival of so many trappings of modern life. But what I'm finding is that in many ways, life hasn't changed that much. I began my journey in Algiers. The French took control of Algiers in 1830. Today, it is the capital city of a country that is the second largest in Africa, 5 times the size of France. Although France controlled the north of Algeria, its vast Saharan regions were still denied them by the warlike Tuareg. This photograph was taken in 1899. That was a significant year in terms of French expansion into the Sahara, for although they still knew little of the desert, they had nevertheless penetrated deep into what is now southern Algeria and captured the oasis town of Insala. Some years before that, a British Army officer, Major Gordon Lang, had actually succeeded in getting to Insala and then on to Timbuktu, only to be killed by the Tuareg on the return journey. So it was to Insala that I flew to start my journey of discovery. I'm met by Tuareg guides. No one with any sense goes anywhere in the Sahara without them. The geology of the Sahara is very varied. It's not just sand. In fact, only some 17% of it is actually covered by sand dunes. Out of the distance, dormant volcanoes loom up on the horizon. This one is Mount Tazat. I'm going right into the middle of the Sahara, to the mountains of Ahagar, close on 3,000 meters high, and to the adjoining Tassili Plateau, the site of some of the world's most amazing prehistoric rock art. To get there, I have to go through the Arak Gorge. This is one of the most extraordinary places in the whole Sahara. These cliffs, several hundred feet, many hundreds of feet high, mark a border, the edge of a fortress, a huge fortress that extends for hundreds of miles in each direction and turns the center of the Sahara into a great fort, Ahagar, in Arabic, Hogar. For the people who live here, the Kala Hagar, this is their place. And behind these walls, they felt impregnable, invincible, untouchable, which they were throughout history. Finally, in 1902, a French column, there had been ones who had come in here before, they'd been destroyed, wiped out by the Tuareg, but finally in 1902, they came through this area, this great gorge that we're in now. To the north of me, it runs out into the Tidikelt. One can see it in the distance. Upstream to the south, we climb and climb and climb right up into the fortress of Ahagar. And it was then, just under 100 years ago, when the French finally came through and defeated the Tuareg in a battle. and their invincibility was no more. And at this place, this is where the Foreign Legion built their first fort in this area, in a sense defending, marking the entrance, one of two entrances into this vast, vast fortress of the Central Sahara. Yes, the first time I came in here was 1964, 2 years after Algerian independence, but there were French still here for a few years after that. And I remember my main memory of it was the beer, full of iced beer and oranges. But it didn't take too much to get drunk in that temperature. And everywhere there were beer bottles outside, I remember quite vividly. And in a sense, this is Beaugest. This is better than Beaugest or worse than Beaugest, depending on one's perspective. But this was the real place.
Everything going to the extreme south of Algeria comes through this gorge. Further on, I get to this extraordinary landscape. The people that lived here did so when the Sahara was much wetter and a savanna. Axe heads, spearheads, pottery shards, and grinding stones are scattered everywhere. Here I confirm what I had been told, that much of this heritage has been systematically looted. And to prove it, this is the website of one of the main looters, a German company advertising these artifacts for sale. An archaeological record, lost forever. The first intrepid explorers into these regions discovered prehistoric rock paintings. Who were the people who painted them, and how many thousands of years ago? So, on to the Tuareg, who still live and dress much the same as they did hundreds of years ago. The most striking thing about them is that it's the men, not the women, who are veiled. Who are these exotic people? We're not 100% certain, but they have their own myth about who they are descended from, and it's actually based partly on fact. I'm heading further south to Tamanrasset, the largest town in the extreme south of Algeria. In deference to my Tuareg friends, I stop at the settlement of Abalessa to visit the tomb of Tinhinan, the legendary ancestress of the Tuareg. Her tomb was discovered, and quite possibly looted, in 1925 by the controversial archaeologist Baron Kuhn de Prorok. The contents of her tomb, jewellery, glasswork, ceramics, gold, and a Roman coin, date her tomb at around the 4th century AD. These artefacts also indicate contact with the Roman world to the north and, quite possibly, the lost civilization of the Garamantes to the east.
لا بصح هو مقرني اكل ومضرني كاره يمنوك هذا يمنوك هذا منوك هذا ولا ونضر ندوا مقرن جان كاره هذا مضراي النيت انت يطاف الكنز الخضر الكنز
Now on to find my guide Hassie's nomadic camp, which is a day's drive away. I'm intrigued to find out whether life has changed much since I was last here 40 years ago. Most people have heard of the Tuareg, but few are sure who these people are or where they came from. They're not just another Bedouin tribe. They are, in fact, a Berber people, once the indigenous population of North Africa and much of the Sahara. The Tuareg themselves do not use the word Tuareg. Rather, it's an Arab word which probably gives us a clue about where they came from. The word Tuareg probably comes from the Arabic word Targa, which is a region in what is now southern Libya. With the Arab invasion of northern Africa in the 10th century, some of the Berber tribes around northern Libya probably moved south to the Targa area, and then to this region, Ahagar. They brought with them their camels and met the indigenous Berber people of this region, who were goat rather than camel breeders. The arrival of camel breeders amongst goat breeders is the key to understanding the strong class system which developed amongst the Tuareg. This class division comprised a camel-owning warrior aristocracy, the nobles, who raided outwards from this vast mountainous region across the Sahara, and the goat breeders, who were called the Keluli, meaning literally the people of the goats. With good reason, the outside world was absolutely terrified of them. Within this area, however, they practiced a goat-based economy, which even today still provides them with much of their subsistence goods. Living in camps is an uncomplicated existence. Much of the time is spent simply tending flocks, watching other people work, and talking. When this young fella needs to be pacified, Mum has the right solution. Even though I'm camped hundreds of miles from the nearest town, fresh bread is always available.
I can hear the demons call when they do what they do. And now I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's controlling you. I know that time can heal it all, I just gotta get through. I just gotta get through, I just gotta it's not true. I wanna put up all my walls cause I'm not in the mood, but then I cut myself off.
"40 years ago, these men would not have been unveiled, especially at night. That is simply because many of the traditional symbolic meanings of the veil have died away. For instance, the veil was believed to protect against evil spirits who might enter the body and cause illness, and such spirits were particularly active at night and in desolate places. I've always been intrigued by the many stories that described how, on several occasions, the Tuareg used poison to kill off their enemies. We're off to find the source of this poison.
Its proper name is Hyposcamus muticus solanaceae falesles, to give it its full Latin name. The local name for it in Tamahak is Ephelela, and this is the most dangerous plant in the world, without a shadow of a doubt. I had it analysed for me at Kew Gardens some years ago, and I believe there are 4 alkaloid families, poisonous families, that one gets in plants. This plant has 3 of them in fairly high concentration. So if one was to eat it or grind it and take it into one's body, one would really be dying from multiple causes, all sorts of deaths all coming on you at once. What is interesting here is that almost all the brown you can see in the plants, the dead plants, are Ephelela. And the flood that's just come through here last month, that's filled up all the weds, has obviously killed the plant. So it's a plant that clearly can't live in water, it's dead, and yet the new plants are just beginning to come through. Here's the dead plant, the new one coming through. And it's only in this part of the Sahara. It's quite a rare plant to find, but in this area there are several weds where it does grow in abundance like this.
I'm on my way to Assakrem and the hermitage of an extraordinary Frenchman who is today a revered pillar of the Roman Catholic Church. Charles de Foucauld was born into an aristocratic background and was independently wealthy. He joined the army, but didn't have the most successful military career in Algeria, his playboy lifestyle not being appreciated by his superiors. But after leaving the army, and winning the first ever French Geographical Society's gold medal for his exploration of Morocco, basically spying, he became first a Trappist monk and then moved back to the Sahara, where he formed his own religious order, the Little Brothers of Jesus.
To me, his most extraordinary contribution, and it is extraordinary, is he was a scholar. More than an academic, he was a scholar of quite extraordinary powers. His work that he wrote while here, and much of it in Tamanrasset, his dictionaries on the area, his collections of writings, his poems on this area, are today without doubt the most valuable work that's ever been written on this part of the world.
In the early morning, we walked to the other side of Assakrem, to the view that overlooks the high mountains of Attacor, where the old Tuareg nomadic campments used to be found. They camped here for centuries, possibly thousands of years. Now it's almost deserted. Only Foucault's Hermitage sits at the top here at Assakrem, but lower down there are now a couple of Spartan shelters where it's possible to hang out and contemplate the beauty of the scenery. When not at the Hermitage, Foucault spent much of his time here in Tamanrasset, at the fort that was built for him by the French. It was here that he was murdered during an Islamic anti-colonial revolt in 1916. Now we're back down in Tamanrasset, I'm off to find some very old acquaintances.
"40 years ago, I came here and I was sitting with my old friend Sergei Schliemann, and I was a young undergraduate, 18 years old, studying anthropology, and this was a tiny, tiny, tiny little dot on the map in the middle of the Sahara, and the only cafe, the only place to eat was here at the Café de la Paix, the first cafe in town. And Sergei Schliemann, he actually lived in the first house that was ever built. And I've come back here now to see him, old friends, old acquaintances, and to see what has happened to this tiny, tiny dot, which is now a vast city. 150,000 people. You can see the traffic roaring past. This is a one-way street I'm actually sitting in. In the past, you hardly ever even saw a vehicle anywhere near the place. When I first came here, Schliemann, on my left here, he was 55 years old, or thereabouts. This is Tamanrasset's first market, its original market when it was a tiny little town. Then it was open. Now they've closed it in a little bit, but it still has exactly the same atmosphere as it has then. More things here, it's a bit more touristy, obviously, a bit more bric-a-brac. But if you look around here, you can find almost anything that you need, and if you can't, they'll probably get it for you. I love this souk. It has a wonderful atmosphere to it. And the thing I like about it is, of all the markets I know in Africa, and that's quite a few, it's the only place, the only one I know of, where you're not pestered to buy things. You can walk around here, talk to people, they won't even ask you to buy. Very relaxed atmosphere, typical of the charm of Tamanrasset, the town itself.
As usual in these places, one of the most common sights are the herbs and spices. But also they sell perhaps the most important commodity of all in this heat, salt.
When was it? November last year, I was in Niger, and huge salt caravans still running today there. 6,000 camels I counted in just 2 days, as far as the eye could see, running from Bilma to Agadez, carrying salt. Slightly different quality to this, but exactly the same commodity.
And now Amador, to find out how it was brought from the very heart of the desert itself.
This is the purest salt in the Sahara. About 97%, something of that order. Literally table salt. You can just, I won't lick it, it's too salty. What we're seeing here now is quite incredible. There's been huge rains. All this has been flooded up. And what it's done is all the old salt workings, they haven't been used for nearly 40 years, but you could see all the old salt workings here. They've been just filled in with water and muck that's come in from the Wed behind, and it's just turning back into solid salt again. Underneath here is rock salt, purest in the Sahara. It's now been filled with water. This last few weeks we're standing on very soft, mushy terrain. In fact, I'm going to take my shoes off, because as you walk onto it here, you can feel it sinking. Somewhere underneath here, there's going to be a hole, maybe 5-6 feet deep, which one could just slip into, so I'm walking quite carefully. This is incredible. I'm just walking in almost boiling mud here. Boiling, salt. This is something to do with Sodom and Gomorrah, I think. The temperature is, I don't know what it is. I can't stand still because it's so hot. And it's just bubbling up underneath. Most extraordinary experience. Just boiling mud salt. And from here, something in the order of 5,000 tons of solid rock salt have been cut out over the years and traded down south.
Then the music started. And then, from the distance, the camel can move at a surprising pace, and the sight of this bearing down on you, sword in hand, must have been truly terrifying. Tea is the first thing that happens when you stop. The fire is lit and the pot comes out. And, a little like the Japanese, there is the tea ceremony. Maulud, our senior driver, brings over more supplies for our cook. And it's to Maulud's village that I go next. As we get there, we run into a bit of action. The village is being visited by a group of blacksmiths, and everyone has brought something to be fixed. The blacksmiths, called Inaden, are a very specific caste found throughout much of the Sahara. Their origin, possibly Jewish, goes back hundreds of years. This is what Maulud and the Tuareg have lived with all their lives. The evidence of a much earlier civilization that we now know lived here thousands of years ago. The first Europeans who came here also saw this evidence. These animals, and the giraffes engraved on the rock, prove that a long time ago the Sahara was savanna, not desert. Alongside the engravings is a grave. In this part of the Sahara, such graves are not uncommon. These so-called keyhole graves are now known to be up to 6,000 years old and were probably those of the tribal elders. The Tuareg have an extraordinary sense of direction that at times is bewildering for someone not born to it. As they are regularly miles from help of any kind, they have to be self-sufficient. When one of our vehicles suffers a puncture, it requires a nighttime repair. I'm heading off to find our other guide, Hamdi's camp. The other Tuareg with us, who've been pulling his leg for days now, saying that he won't be able to find the place, and his wife. Eventually we find it. Hamdi has just told me that 2 of his young sons are about to be circumcised. This news caught us completely by surprise, as it did Hamdi. All the boys are specially prepared with shaven heads and then dressed in the same way. On the back of each boy, the sign is marked in henna. It is actually the letter T, which in Tuareg represents the angel Gabriel. For the Tuareg, the angel Gabriel is female and symbolically important in a matrilineal society. This female association is thought to ease the trauma of the circumcision. When they are dressed for the occasion, the boys have ceremonial makeup put on. They are then led a short distance from the camp. The ceremony itself is an all-male affair.
This is really the most extraordinary occasion. We arrived here last night and to this camp where one of our Tuareg helpers lives, or has moved to the moment. That is Hamdi's camp. And he's here because all around us is the most fantastic pasture, the most incredible pasture on every side, certainly in most people's memory. I haven't got statistics available, but there hasn't been rains like this for maybe a generation or more. And when there's so much rain like this, there's good pasture, camps come together. They move in from hundreds of miles, in this particular case, hundreds of kilometers perhaps, and lots of social things happen. Weddings take place at this time of the year, people get together, and all around me you can see these cars. These are Tuareg from other camps. They've come up here. There are several camps, 4, 5, 6, within about 10, 15 miles of us. And as you can see, there's stuff just put on the ground. It's temporary. They move in, they're moving around. It looks very temporary. People are moving quickly because of this extraordinary social occasion that has built up here. But most remarkable of all is that first thing this morning when we were just about to leave, Hamdi came over to us, and we were camped half a mile over there somewhere, and said, come over quickly, we're having a circumcision, we want you to film it. And none of us knew what was going on. He didn't even know, the father didn't know until he got here last night, that there was going to be here he is right by me, that he didn't know he was going to have his children, or two of his and one another, circumcised this morning. So he asked us, he wanted us to film it. We were a bit uncertain as to what we should do. He said, no, please, I want it filmed. I wanted it recorded, so we filmed it. And this is a very rare thing. This is a traditional circumcision. The authorities, the government, the hospitals are trying to stop it because of the health factors. A lot of infections can come from these. But the remarkable thing is that one of our drivers is a male nurse, an infirmière from the hospital, who actually officially does these circumcisions in hospital. He happens to be with us by chance as a driver, and he was in the purple and watching very closely to make sure everything was all right. The actual circumcision itself is done by a traditional taleb, a marabout, a religious man, who moves around these camps and does these, performs these operations.
These girls are not carrying food, but sand. The clean sand is placed beside the boys, who then sit on it. Blood is being spilt, and it is believed that it can attract harmful spirits. This way, it'll drop onto the sand, and it can be taken away. This is a big feast, so several goats need to be slaughtered to feed everybody. But now we really do have to leave. And a very happy Hamdi hurries back to join us. We still have a long way to travel before we reach our final destination, the Tassili. After the French conquest of the Sahara at the beginning of the 20th century, French army officers increasingly came across caves like this, often in the most inaccessible places, where, to their astonishment, they saw paintings which we now know to be thousands of years old. Paintings are invariably on the roofs of the caves and the rock shelters. Paintings of cattle, known as the Bovidian period, are up to 6,000 years old. The artists sometimes placed their own mark on the walls, their hands. These are the hunters of the group. I'm now moving on to another site of one of these early discoveries. From Hamdi's camp, I make my way to the small oasis of Tamajat, the most isolated and inaccessible oasis in this part of the Sahara. When I first came here, alone, in 1965, they didn't even know that Algeria's War of Independence had finished more than 3 years earlier.
In 1932, a Frenchman, Captain Dupré, came to this cave. He discovered it, and apart from finding the quite exquisite collection of Berber rock art paintings here, he saw the first horse-drawn chariots that were ever seen in the Sahara. And of course this led him and many other people to believe that the Romans had of course crossed the Sahara, which they may have done. But we now know that these chariots belong to the Garamant civilization in the Fezzan, a few hundred miles to the east of here. Unfortunately for Dupré, this wonderful discovery was rather overshadowed in the following year by another discovery in the Oued Jarrat, a couple of hundred miles to the east of here, of the most amazing collection of rock art or engravings that had yet ever been discovered in the Sahara, which rather took the gloss off this cave here, and it really rather languished in terms of any analysis for a long time to come.
While these beautiful paintings may look like women to us, they are probably men. This is quite recognizable as a milking cow. By this time, cattle have been domesticated. The roof and walls are covered with hundreds of paintings depicting domestic life of thousands of years ago. But there is the odd, strange shape.
This is a very interesting painting. We've seen one in the cave. This is much better, more clearly defined. It's Berber men dancing, almost like modern-day line dancing. You can see the skirts here, the sticks. But what is particularly interesting is the heads, which are painted in stick-like formation. There's only two heads. There's one there, one there. None of these men have heads. Malika Hashid, the former director of the National Park, or the Tassili National Park, she thinks that this is because the painter just forgot to put the heads on. He went off, he had something else to do, maybe he never came back, maybe he died. So we're left with this almost perfect painting, but incomplete and rather interesting.
The Tuareg refer to valleys as weds. I'm off to one of the most famous of them, the Oued Jarrat.
This rather insignificant-looking wedge just beneath me here is the entrance to one of the Sahara's most hidden secrets. In 1933, a young French army officer, Lieutenant Brennan, a remarkable man, was here. He came here for the first time, and he saw, where I'm standing now, just beneath me, a couple of prehistoric rock engravings. He saw them, and his curiosity took him higher up into this wedge, and he came across what we have now learnt to be more than 4,000 prehistoric rock engravings crammed into this one particular site. We've just arrived here. This is the very last of the evening light, and tomorrow morning we're going to push up into the wedge to film some of these engravings. We've no idea what we're going to find there, because while the wedge beneath me now it looks dry, and it is fairly dry, 3 days ago there were huge rains in this area, and this wedge was a raging torrent 12 to 15 feet deep.
This is a most inhospitable place. The sun beats down and the heat hits you from the boulders and from the sides of the cliffs. It's oppressive. Engravings are to be found in many locations throughout the Sahara. These mind-blowing engravings show a range of animals that once lived in the Central Sahara before it dried up, some 3,000 years ago. Many, such as this one, are theriomorphs, part man, part animal. This engraving is a Palerovis antiquus, a type of buffalo that has been extinct for many thousands of years.
Here, in the southwest corner of the Dida Depression, is one of the most significant sites of prehistoric rock engravings in the Sahara. Of some 160 engravings, centre stage is a magnificent ox, one of several cattle at the site, who measures almost 6 meters from nose to tail and whose entire body is infilled with spiral designs.
Spirals and concentric circles have long baffled prehistorians. Research now shows that such designs almost certainly have a neuropsychological component. The artists may be reflecting designs and symbolic messages obtained through trance. However, we still do not know how the trance state may have been induced. It could have been by music, dance, drugs, or whatever. It's difficult to make out some engravings, so our guide fills this one in with sand to highlight the design. The Tassili Plateau offers a magnificent landscape, and it will be my final port of call. It is home to some of the most exquisite prehistoric rock art in the world. The Tassili Plateau offers a magnificent landscape, cut by deep, canyon-like valleys. This one, Imiru, is the deepest and longest, over 150 kilometers of more or less continuous flowing water. This village, Idaran, is probably the oldest settled site in this part of the Sahara. We know that it has scarcely changed over several thousand years. Who would imagine fish in the middle of the Sahara? Like a mirage for the thirsty traveller, this is truly an unbelievable place in the heart of the largest desert in the world. I'm about halfway through my travels. Soon, I'll be on top of the Tassili Plateau with its fantastic rock art discoveries. I'll discover heroes and villains, and I shall reveal how the discoveries themselves were to provide the world of archaeology with one of the biggest art frauds of the last century.